They said it was the most audacious escape plan anyone had ever attempted. A light-skinned enslaved woman would disguise herself as a white gentleman traveling north for medical treatment, accompanied by her darker-skinned husband posing as her devoted slave. They would travel through 4 slave states in broad daylight, staying at the finest hotels, eating at the best restaurants, riding first-class trains and steamboats, hiding in plain sight while every white person they encountered assumed the disguise was reality. One mistake, one slip of the tongue, one moment when someone looked too closely, and they'd both be captured, separated, and sold so far south they'd never see each other again. In December 1848, Ellen and William Craft did exactly that. For 4 days they traveled through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, Ellen wrapped in bandages and playing the role of a sickly young plantation owner, while William attended to his master's every need. They fooled conductors and captains, hotel clerks and fellow passengers, slave catchers and curious white travelers. They stayed in the best accommodations slavery's architecture could offer, all while being the very people that architecture was designed to contain and control. This is the story of how 2 enslaved people weaponized the assumptions and prejudices of the system that oppressed them, how they turned racism itself into camouflage, how they walked through the heart of slavery wearing its own clothing and emerged free on the other side. This is the story of Ellen and William, of a desperate plan that shouldn't have worked but did, of love and courage in the face of impossible odds, and of what it means to seize your own liberation when the world says you have no right to freedom. My name is Ellen. In 1848, I was 22 years old, enslaved in Macon, Georgia, property of a man named Dr. Robert Collins, who'd inherited me from his wife's family. I was what slavery called a mulatto, the child of my enslaved mother and my mother's white master, born into bondage despite having white ancestry that showed in my light skin and features. In slavery's cruel mathematics, 1 drop of black blood meant you were black regardless of appearance, meant you were property, regardless of looking like the people who owned you. My husband William was 24, enslaved by a different master, a cabinet maker named Ira Taylor, who allowed William to hire out his time as a skilled carpenter. We'd been married for 4 years, jumped the broom in 1844, built what life we could within slavery's narrow confines. We loved each other fiercely, but that love was shadowed by constant fear, fear of being sold separately, fear of having children who'd be born enslaved, fear of growing old in bondage, fear that this was all our lives would ever be. I'd watched my mother suffer through slavery's particular cruelties. She'd been repeatedly assaulted by our master, had borne children who looked white but were enslaved, had endured the psychological torture of being owned by her own children's father. I'd been separated from her when I was young, given as a wedding gift to Dr. Collins's wife, forced to watch my family broken apart by white people who saw us as property to be distributed like furniture. William had similar stories, similar trauma. His mother had been sold away from him when he was a child. He'd been separated from his siblings, scattered across Georgia plantations, lost to each other in slavery's vast dispersal of families. We'd both learned that enslaved people couldn't protect the people they loved, couldn't keep families together, couldn't prevent masters from destroying everything that mattered. So we'd made a choice. We would not have children, would not bring new lives into slavery, would not create people we loved only to watch them be sold away or grow up in bondage. It was a painful decision, a sacrifice of one of life's greatest joys, but necessary in a system designed to breed enslaved people like livestock. But the decision not to have children made us vulnerable in a different way. Without children binding us to our current locations, without family networks keeping us rooted, we were at higher risk of being sold. Masters often sold childless enslaved couples when they needed money or when slaves became inconvenient. We were living on borrowed time, knowing that any day we might be separated and sold to different states, never to see each other again. That knowledge, that constant low-level terror, made us desperate for freedom. We talked about escape constantly, whispered plans in the darkness of our cabin, dreamed of the North where slavery didn't exist, but every plan we considered had fatal flaws. We couldn't run on foot, too far to go through hostile territory where slave patrols roamed. We couldn't use the Underground Railroad easily from Georgia, too deep south, with too few safe houses. We needed something different, something unexpected, something no one had tried before. The idea came to me in November 1848. I was attending to Dr. Collins's wife, helping her dress for a social event, when I overheard conversation about a planter who'd traveled north for medical treatment. He'd been accompanied by his personal slave, stayed at fine hotels, received excellent care, returned home months later, much improved. It planted a seed. What if we traveled north openly as master and slave, hiding in plain sight, but I was a woman, obviously enslaved despite my light skin. William was clearly black. We couldn't just travel as ourselves, claiming to be free. No one would believe it. Then the full plan crystallized. What if I disguised myself as a white man, a sickly young planter traveling north for medical treatment, and William came as my devoted slave attending to my needs? My light skin would pass for white. Men's clothing would hide my gender. Bandages would hide my face and excuse my not speaking much. We could travel openly through slave states, stay at hotels, ride trains and steamboats, all while everyone assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be, a wealthy white gentleman with his faithful slave. It was insane, it was brilliant, it was so audacious that it might actually work precisely because no one would expect it. I told William that night, laid out the plan in our cabin while he listened with growing amazement and horror. We'd need men's clothing for me, extensive bandages to hide my face and excuse my silence, money for tickets and accommodations, timing to coordinate our departure. Incredible luck to pull off the deception for 4 straight days through 4 different states. The risks were enormous. If we were caught, we'd be brutally punished. I'd likely be sold to the Deep South, worked to death in cotton fields. William would be sold away too, probably separated from me permanently. We might be tortured as examples, broken publicly to discourage other enslaved people from trying similar escapes. The penalty for attempting escape was severe, and the penalty for this kind of elaborate deception would be worse. But the alternative was staying enslaved forever, waiting until one or both of us was sold, living in constant fear, never experiencing freedom. That was its own kind of death, just slower. William was terrified but determined. If we're going to do this, we do it right. We plan every detail. We prepare for every contingency. And we commit completely. No hesitation, no second guessing. We play our roles perfectly or we die trying. We spent the next month preparing. William built up his savings from carpentry work, eventually accumulating enough money for tickets and expenses. We studied how wealthy white men behaved, how they spoke, how they moved, how they interacted with enslaved people. I practiced walking like a man, sitting like a man, gesturing like a man. I deepened my voice, learned to project masculine authority, rehearsed the role until it was second nature. We acquired men's clothing piece by piece, buying items from different shops so no one would notice a pattern. A fine suit, expensive hat, gentleman's cloak, quality boots. Everything a wealthy young planter would wear when traveling. We bought medical supplies, bandages, a sling for my right arm, a cane to explain why I'd need help, dark glasses to hide my eyes. The plan had multiple layers of deception. I'd wear extensive bandages around my face, supposedly for toothache and other ailments. My right arm would be in a sling, explaining why I couldn't write when asked to sign hotel registers. I'd wear dark glasses, claiming light sensitivity. I'd speak as little as possible, with William doing most of the talking, explaining to sympathetic whites that his poor master was terribly ill and needed quiet. Every element of the disguise served multiple purposes, hiding my female features, excusing my inability to perform tasks literate white men would be expected to do, creating sympathy that would discourage questions, making me seem weak and therefore non-threatening. We chose our timing carefully. Late December, when holiday travel was common, and people were distracted by Christmas preparations. We'd leave Macon on December 20th, travel to Savannah by train, then take steamboat to Charleston, another train to Richmond, and finally reach Philadelphia by Christmas Day. 4 days of constant travel, constant danger, constant performance. We told no one our plans, not friends, not family, not other enslaved people. The fewer who knew, the safer we'd be. If someone was tortured for information after we fled, they couldn't reveal what they didn't know. Before I tell you what happened when we attempted this escape, I want you to drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you're interested in stories about incredible courage and ingenuity during America's darkest chapter. These are the moments that changed everything. Now back to Georgia, December 1848, where William and I were about to attempt the impossible. December 20th arrived cold and clear. We'd said quiet goodbyes to people we cared about without revealing we were leaving, just casual farewells that wouldn't raise suspicion. I'd slipped away from Dr. Collins's house in the early morning, changed into my disguise in a location William had prepared, transformed myself from Ellen the enslaved woman to Mr. Johnson, wealthy young planter from Georgia traveling north for medical treatment. The transformation was startling even to me. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The man's suit changed my silhouette completely. The bandages hid most of my face. The dark glasses obscured my eyes. The hat shadowed what remained visible. I looked like a sickly young white gentleman, exactly the role I needed to play. William and I met at the train station separately, he arriving first as was proper for a slave running errands, I arriving shortly after as Mr. Johnson. We maintained our roles perfectly even in that first moment, William approaching deferentially, asking if I was the gentleman who needed assistance traveling north, me nodding weakly and allowing him to take charge of my luggage and tickets. The first test came immediately. The ticket agent looked at us, at William's dark skin and my light skin wrapped in bandages, at the story William told about his poor master needing medical treatment in Philadelphia. The agent was sympathetic, offered condolences about my poor health, sold us tickets for the train to Savannah. We'd passed the first test. Now we just had to pass dozens more over 4 days without making a single mistake. The train to Savannah was terrifying. I sat in the first-class car, the only place a wealthy white gentleman would sit, surrounded by actual wealthy white men who assumed I was one of them. William sat in the baggage car where enslaved people were required to ride. I was alone, wrapped in bandages, unable to speak much, praying no one would engage me in conversation I couldn't sustain. A man across from me tried to make conversation, asked where I was from, where I was going, what brought me north. I gestured to my bandaged face, to my throat, indicating pain. William had prepared me for this. Speak as little as possible, show discomfort, let people's sympathy discourage further questions. It worked. The man apologized for disturbing me, went back to his newspaper. Other passengers saw my obvious illness and left me alone. I sat there for 3 hours maintaining perfect stillness, barely breathing, terrified that any movement would reveal something wrong. We reached Savannah without incident. William collected me from the train, played his role perfectly, concerned slave tending to his suffering master, asking if I needed anything, helping me to the hotel where we'd stay before catching the steamboat to Charleston the next morning. The hotel was the finest in Savannah, exactly where a wealthy planter would stay. William registered us, speaking to the clerk, while I sat weakly in a chair, too ill to stand at the desk. The clerk showed us to rooms, William to the servants' quarters, and me to a luxurious first-floor suite. This was the most surreal part of the experience. I was sleeping in luxury, while William slept in the servants' area. I was being treated with deference and respect, while William was treated as property. The role reversal was disturbing, even though it was necessary for our escape. That first night, I barely slept. Every sound in the hotel made me jump. Certain we'd been discovered. Certain slave catchers were coming to drag us back to Macon. But morning came without incident. We'd survived the first day. Day 2 was the steamboat to Charleston. This was more dangerous because steamboats were smaller spaces with fewer people, meaning more opportunity for extended interaction, more chance someone would notice something wrong with Mr. Johnson. We boarded in character, William deferential and helpful, me wrapped in bandages and clearly suffering. The captain was sympathetic, offered his best cabin, sent the ship's steward to check on me regularly. I spent most of the voyage in that cabin, avoiding interaction, while William moved through the ship serving me and maintaining our cover story with other enslaved people on board. But danger came from an unexpected source. A gentleman on the steamboat turned out to be an acquaintance of Dr. Collins, Ellen's master. He recognized William, had seen him before in Macon, knew he belonged to Ira Taylor. He approached William on deck, Asked what he was doing traveling to Charleston. William's performance was masterful. He explained that he was traveling with his master's friend, Mr. Johnson, a young planter who'd become ill and needed to go north for medical treatment. Dr. Collins had kindly allowed William to accompany Mr. Johnson since the gentleman needed experienced help. It was a mercy mission, showing Dr. Collins's Christian generosity in lending his associate slave to assist a suffering man. The gentleman accepted this explanation completely, even complimented Dr. Collins's generosity, even came to my cabin to introduce himself, to offer condolences about my health, to say that Dr. Collins was a fine man and William was a good slave to take such excellent care of me. I nodded weakly, gestured my thanks, indicated through William that I was too ill for extended conversation. The gentleman apologized for intruding and left. We'd survived our closest call so far. Someone who actually knew William and could have exposed us had instead believed our story completely, had even reinforced our cover by praising the arrangement. Charleston was our midpoint, the place where our resolve would be most tested. We'd been performing for 2 days straight, maintaining our roles constantly, living in fear of discovery. We were exhausted mentally, if not physically, and we still had 2 more days of travel through Virginia to reach Philadelphia and freedom. We stayed at Charleston's finest hotel, continued our performance, prepared for the next leg. That night, William came to my room to check on me as would be expected, and we whispered our genuine feelings behind the roles we'd been playing. I'm terrified, I admitted. Every moment I think we're about to be caught. So am I, William said, but we're halfway. 2 more days. We can do this. What if we don't make it? What if they catch us in Virginia? Richmond is still slave territory. Then we'll have tried, he said. We'll have shown that enslaved people can use the master's own assumptions against them. We'll have proven we're intelligent enough to fool them. That's worth something, even if we fail. I don't want to fail, I said. I want to make it to Philadelphia. I want to live as a free woman with you as my free husband. We will, he promised. Trust the plan, trust the disguise, trust that white people see what they expect to see, and they expect to see a white gentleman with his slave. We're giving them exactly what they expect. Day 3 was the train from Charleston to Richmond. This was the longest single leg of the journey, 16 hours through the Carolinas and Virginia, through the heart of slave territory, where any number of things could go wrong. The train was crowded with holiday travelers, families going home for Christmas, businessmen returning from trips, and several slave traders transporting human cargo south. I was surrounded by the architects and beneficiaries of slavery, sitting among them as an equal, while William was in the baggage car with the other enslaved people being transported as property. A slave trader sat next to me, struck up conversation, assumed I was a fellow owner of human beings, asked if I was in the trade, if I was transporting any slaves, if I had opinions about the market. I shook my head, gestured to my bandaged throat, indicated I couldn't speak easily. He continued talking anyway, telling me about the excellent profits he was making, about the high prices slaves were fetching in the Deep South, about his plans to expand his business. I sat there listening to him describe human trafficking like it was perfectly normal business, feeling sick but maintaining my composed exterior. At one point he offered to buy William, noticed what a good slave William appeared to be, asked if I'd consider selling him. I shook my head firmly, gestured that William was too valuable, too well trained to part with. The trader shrugged, said he understood, went back to discussing his business. The psychological toll of this journey was enormous. I was passing as white, experiencing the deference and respect white people received, seeing how differently the world treated people based purely on perceived race. I was seeing slavery from the master's perspective, understanding the casual cruelty, the complete dehumanization, the way white people discussed buying and selling human beings with the same tone they'd use to discuss livestock. It was educational and nauseating, made me understand viscerally why this system had to be destroyed, why freedom was worth any risk, why we could never go back to bondage after seeing how the other half lived. We reached Richmond on the evening of day 3. One more night in slave territory, one more morning of maintaining our disguise, one more train ride to reach Philadelphia and freedom. We were so close. But Richmond was also particularly dangerous, Virginia's capital, seat of slave trade. place where many people had expertise in identifying runaways and fraudulent free papers. We stayed at Richmond's best hotel, endured another night of terror and anticipation. Tomorrow would determine everything. Either we'd reach Philadelphia as free people, or we'd be captured and destroyed. Day 4, December 24th, Christmas Eve, the final train from Richmond to Philadelphia, the last leg of our impossible journey. We boarded in character one final time, William dutiful and I suffering, maintaining the roles that had protected us for 4 days. But Richmond's train station provided our final and most dangerous test. A railway official approached us on the platform, looked at William carefully, looked at me, asked to see our papers. This was standard procedure. Virginia law required enslaved people traveling with masters to carry documentation, proving they had permission to travel. William produced papers, forged documents we'd prepared showing that William belonged to Mr. Johnson and had permission to accompany his master north. The official examined them carefully, too carefully, looking for any discrepancy that would indicate forgery. I sat on a bench nearby, bandaged and weak, projecting illness and suffering, creating sympathy that might influence the official's judgment. Other passengers noticed the sick gentleman being bothered by officious railway workers, murmured their disapproval of harassing an obviously ill traveler. The official looked at the papers, looked at William, looked at me. The moment stretched forever. This was it, the moment where 4 days of perfect performance would be validated or destroyed, where we'd board the train to freedom or be arrested as runaways. The official handed the papers back to William. These appear to be in order. Sorry to trouble you and your master. Safe travels. We'd passed. The final test, the last obstacle. We boarded the train with the official's blessing, found our seats, began the final journey toward freedom. The trip from Richmond to Philadelphia took 8 hours. 8 hours of gradually increasing hope as we traveled north through Maryland and Delaware, through states where slavery still existed, but where we were getting closer to the border. 8 hours of William and I maintaining our roles, even though we wanted to celebrate, wanted to drop the disguise, wanted to acknowledge that we'd actually pulled this off. We crossed into Pennsylvania at 4 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve. Pennsylvania was free soil. Slavery didn't exist here. Technically, we were free the moment we crossed that border, though fugitive slave laws meant we weren't completely safe until we'd established ourselves and gotten legal help. But we were free. After 4 days of constant performance, after 1,000 moments where discovery could have happened, after traveling through the heart of slavery disguised as master and slave, we'd reached free territory. We'd done the impossible. The train reached Philadelphia at 6 in the evening. William collected our luggage, helped me from the train, and we walked through the station still in character because we didn't know who might be watching. But once we were clear of the station, once we were in the streets of Philadelphia, walking toward the Abolition Society offices, where we'd been told to seek help, we finally let the performance drop. I removed the bandages from my face, took off the dark glasses, looked at William with my own eyes for the first time in 4 days. We were free, both of us. Actually, legally free. We stood there on a Philadelphia street on Christmas Eve, 2 former enslaved people who just completed one of the most audacious escapes in American history, holding each other and crying with relief and joy and disbelief that we'd actually survived. The Quakers at the Abolition Society took us in, provided shelter and legal assistance, helped us establish our freedom legally. They were amazed by our story, by the disguise, by the audacity of traveling openly through 4 slave states, pretending to be master and slave. They told us we were famous, that word of our escape was already spreading, that we'd become symbols of enslaved people's intelligence and courage. We stayed in Philadelphia through January, establishing ourselves, recovering from the psychological toll of the journey, learning to be free people. The Abolition Society helped William find carpentry work and helped me find sewing work. We rented a small apartment. We built a life as free people. But our freedom was precarious. The Fugitive Slave Act meant slave catchers could operate in Pennsylvania, could capture us and drag us back to Georgia, where Dr. Collins and Ira Taylor were furious about our escape and offering rewards for our capture. We weren't safe in Philadelphia, not really. So in the spring of 1849, we made another journey. this time by ship from Philadelphia to Liverpool, England. Britain had abolished slavery decades earlier. British law didn't recognize slavery or fugitive slave provisions. On British soil, we'd be truly safe, truly free, beyond the reach of anyone who wanted to recapture us. We lived in England for 19 years, from 1849 to 1868. We worked, saved money, became active in the abolitionist movement, told our story repeatedly at anti-slavery gatherings. Our escape became famous in Britain and America, an example of the ingenuity and courage of enslaved people, proof that they were intelligent enough to outwit their masters. We published a book about our escape in 1850, Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom, detailing every moment of our journey. The book sold widely, raised money for the abolitionist cause, inspired other enslaved people to believe escape was possible. The Civil War came in 1861. We followed it anxiously from England, hoping the Union would win, hoping slavery would end, hoping America would finally confront its original sin. When the war ended in 1865 and the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, we celebrated knowing that millions of people had achieved the freedom we'd seized in 1848. We returned to America in 1868, settling in Boston, where we'd be safe under new laws and new constitutional amendments. We worked in the carpentry and sewing trades, bought a small house, lived as free citizens in a country that had finally ended slavery. We helped other formerly enslaved people adjust to freedom, sharing our experiences and resources, supporting the difficult transition from bondage to liberty. We joined organizations advocating for black civil rights, understanding that legal freedom wasn't enough without economic opportunity and political equality. William died in 1890 at age 66, his lungs weakened from decades of breathing sawdust in carpentry work. I held his hand while he died, grateful for 46 years of marriage, grateful that we'd both lived most of our lives as free people, grateful that we'd made the choice in December 1848 to risk everything for freedom. I died in 1891 at age 65, 1 year after William. I like to think I simply couldn't imagine living without him, that our spirits were too intertwined to survive separation. We were buried together in Boston, two formerly enslaved people who'd outwitted slavery and lived to see its destruction. People asked me over the years if I'd been terrified during those 4 days disguised as Mr. Johnson, if maintaining the performance while surrounded by slave traders and sympathetic whites had felt impossible. Of course I was terrified, I'd say. Every moment was terrifying. Every conversation was a minefield. Every interaction could have revealed us. But terror doesn't erase necessity. We needed to be free. This was our chance. Terror was just something we had to carry while we did what needed doing. They asked if I regretted the plan, if I thought we should have tried a different escape method, maybe running at night through the woods like most runaways did. I never regretted it, I'd answer. Our plan was audacious, but that's why it worked. No one expected enslaved people to have the intelligence and courage to travel openly through slave states. Our escape proved we were their equals in every way that mattered. That proof was almost as valuable as the freedom itself. They asked why I'd disguised myself as a white man, rather than trying some other approach. Why embrace the role of someone from the class that oppressed us? Because slavery's greatest weapon was assumption, I'd explain. White people assumed other whites were superior, assumed black people were inferior, assumed light skin meant freedom and dark skin meant bondage. We weaponized those assumptions, turned them into camouflage, used the system's own prejudices to defeat it. That's not embracing oppression. That's understanding your enemy well enough to exploit their weaknesses. On my deathbed, a young formerly enslaved woman asked me if our story was really true, if we'd really traveled through 4 slave states for 4 days disguised as master and slave, if that kind of escape was actually possible. I looked at her seriously. Every word is true. We did it exactly as I've told you, and we did it because we understood something important. Enslaved people were never the inferior beings masters claimed we were. We were intelligent, capable, courageous. We could outwit our oppressors when given the chance. Your liberation, the liberation of millions, that happened because enslaved people seized their freedom through intelligence and determination. Never forget that. Never let anyone tell you that enslaved people were passive victims. We were active resistors, and our resistance eventually destroyed slavery. She asked one final question: would you do it again? Knowing how terrifying it was, knowing you could have been caught and killed, would you still take that risk? Without hesitation, I said, 1,000 times yes, because 4 days of terror bought 43 years of freedom, because living as a free woman with William as my free husband was worth any risk, because proving that enslaved people could outwit the system was worth any danger. Yes. Always yes. This was the story of Ellen and William Craft, enslaved in Macon, Georgia, who escaped to freedom in December 1848 by disguising Ellen as a white gentleman with bandaged face traveling north for medical treatment, while William posed as her slave, successfully traveling through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia over 4 days, staying at fine hotels and riding first-class accommodations, while fooling every white person they encountered, reaching Philadelphia on Christmas Eve 1848, moving to England in 1849, where they lived until 1868, returning to America after slavery's abolition, living in Boston until William's death in 1890 and Ellen's in 1891. Their escape became one of the most famous in American history, proving the intelligence and courage of enslaved people and inspiring abolitionists worldwide. Their story demonstrated that the most powerful weapon against oppression is understanding its mechanisms well enough to exploit its weaknesses, that courage means acting despite terror, and that love makes people capable of extraordinary risks for freedom. The echoes of Ellen and William's journey remind us that resistance takes many forms, that intelligence and deception can be as powerful as direct confrontation, that understanding your oppressor's assumptions allows you to weaponize those assumptions, and that sometimes the most radical act is walking through the heart of slavery wearing its own disguise. If this story of audacity and brilliance moved you, subscribe to hear more untold stories from America's struggle for freedom. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what resonated most about Ellen and William's incredible 4-day journey through the heart of slavery.